Hello, this is Mr. Hassel again with another music theory lesson. Today we are on lesson 37 of Unit 9, and we're going to talk about augmented and diminished intervals. Now, just to review so far in this unit, first we learned that an interval is just the distance between two notes. They are measured in seconds, thirds, fourths, fifths, and so on. Then we learned that in a major scale you have two types of diatonic intervals. You have major intervals and you have perfect intervals. The intervals that are major are seconds, thirds, sixths, and sevenths, and the intervals that are perfect are unisons, fourths, fifths, and octaves. Those are called diatonic intervals because they naturally occur within the key signature. You do not have to add any type of accidental. Then, the next lesson, we learned about minor intervals. Any major interval can be made minor by decreasing the top note by a half step. So, for instance, if I had a major third from C to E, and I lower that top note by a half step from a C to an E flat, that would make it a minor third. Only major intervals can be made into minor intervals. Perfect intervals cannot. That brings us to today's lesson of augmented and diminished intervals. The word augmented means made larger. When a perfect or major interval is made larger by a half step, it becomes augmented. For example, a perfect fifth becomes an augmented fifth. To raise a sharp note by another half step, you use a double sharp, and the double sharp looks like that. It's a little X. Alright, so here is an augmented unison. Here is an augmented second, augmented third, augmented fourth. A G to a D sharp would be an augmented fifth. A G to an E sharp would be an augmented sixth. A G to an F double sharp is an augmented seven. Now, if you remember, in the key of G, we have an F sharp. The key signature for G major is one sharp, F sharp. So a G to an F sharp would be a major seventh. If we raise that another half step to a double sharp, that would make it an augmented seventh. An augmented octave would be a G to a G sharp. So any major or perfect interval that is made larger by a half step is called augmented. Now, on the other hand, the word diminished means made smaller. With the exception of the perfect unison, any perfect or minor interval that is made smaller by a half step becomes a diminished interval. For example, a perfect fourth becomes a diminished fourth. To lower a flat note by a half step, use a double flat, and that's what a double flat looks like. So you see here, a C to a D would be a major interval, a major second. A C to a D flat would be a minor second, and a C to a double flat would be a diminished second. So think major, minor, diminished. The interval of a third, so a C to E would be a major third. If we added one flat, that would make it a minor third. Add another flat, that makes it a diminished third. Okay, here is a fourth, so a C to a regular F is a perfect fourth. You lower that top note by a half step, it becomes a diminished fourth. Remember, I told you that perfect intervals cannot be minor. If you lower it, it goes directly to diminished. Here is a diminished fifth. Here is a diminished sixth, diminished seventh, and a diminished octave. Since lowering either note of a perfect unison would actually increase its size, the perfect unison cannot be diminished, only augmented. When the keynote and the upper note of an interval are not from the same major scale, in other words, when you have to add accidentals, it is called a chromatic scale. Minor, diminished, and augmented intervals are always chromatic scales because you're going to always have some type of accidental for the most part. Alright, number one, name the augmented intervals. So here is an augmented fifth, and we're just going to put an A instead of aug. Here is an augmented fourth. Here is an augmented unison. Here's an augmented third. Here is an augmented sixth, augmented second, augmented octave, and an augmented seventh. Have to think about that one for a minute. Next, we're going to write the note above the given note to complete the augmented harmonic interval. Remember, harmonic is when they're played at the same time. Melodic is when they're played separately. So in a harmonic interval, it has to go directly above it, except if you're doing a second or a unison. So an augmented unison would look like this. So a C up to a C sharp. An augmented sixth above F. Here's 3, 5, there's your sixth. So that's a major sixth. To make it augmented, I add a sharp. I raise that top note by a half step. An augmented third above G. So a G up to B is a major third. To augmented, I raise it a half step. An augmented fourth above C. A C up to an F is a perfect fourth. If I raise that top note by a half step, it makes it augmented. An augmented fifth above F. Here is a perfect fifth. Here is an augmented fifth. An augmented octave. Here is a perfect octave, so G up to G would be a perfect octave. To make that augmented, I raise that top note a half step. An augmented seventh above F, so an F up to E is a major seventh. Here is an augmented seventh. Raise it a half step. Okay, an augmented second above C, so C to a D is a major second. If I raise that by a half step, it becomes an augmented second. Next, we're going to name the diminished intervals. We'll just put a D instead of DIM. So here is a diminished third. Here is a diminished fourth. Here's a diminished octave. Here is 3, 5, 6. Here is a diminished sixth. Here is a diminished seventh. And here is a diminished second. Number 4, we're going to write the note above the given note to complete the diminished harmonic interval. Alright, so a fourth above C would be F. So there's a perfect fourth. Here's a diminished fourth. We lower that. Diminished means made smaller. Okay, diminished octave. So here is an 8. G up to G would be your octave. Lower that top note by a half step. It becomes diminished. A diminished second above C. So C to D would be a major second, correct? We lower it once, it becomes minor. We lower it again, it becomes diminished, or double flat. A diminished seventh above F. F up to E would be a seventh. We lower it once, it becomes minor. We lower it again, it becomes diminished. A diminished third above G. So a G to a B is a major third. G to a B flat is a minor third. G to a B double flat is a diminished third. A diminished fifth above G. So here's our perfect fifth. A G to a D is a perfect fifth. We lower it half step. That makes it diminished. And lastly, a diminished sixth above C. So a C up to an A is a major sixth. We lower it by a half step. It makes it a diminished sixth. So I know this lesson is really tricky. It's probably one of the hardest lessons in the book, in my opinion. But hopefully you understand that, and if you have problems, just go back and watch the video again. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.